Dominicast presents Truth Bites, the truth in small bites. The capital sins: gluttony, lust, and sloth.
The capital sin of gluttony. No one wants to be labelled a glutton. Gluttony is more than just a big appetite. It's associated with practices like binge eating, devouring everything in sight without considering the needs of others, eating until you're bloated or sickened. However, gluttony is the vice not just of excessive eating and drinking. It's an out-of-proportion love of the pleasures of the table and the pursuing of this satisfaction for its own sake. We can see this aspect of gluttony in the picky or fussy eater, or even in the health food fanatic. The coffee must be just so. Everything must be super fresh. Certain food sources or restaurants are the only ones worth patronising. It's this type of fastidiousness that the modern person has been conditioned to identify as a sign of cultivation or a discerning palate. The number of food outlets in the average street or mall shows clearly the fixation our society has on feeding itself, not to mention the plethora of cooking shows and food commentaries in most newspapers and magazines. Most of us wouldn't like to admit that we're a little too focused on our diet and not enough on the more important things in life, like our human relationships. When our personal eating habits derive from personal quirks or compulsions rather than health necessities, they often become burdensome to others, at which point we can be fairly sure we are in the clutches of gluttony. Gluttony weakens the will. It makes us not only physically but spiritually flabby, because it involves giving in to our bodily appetites whenever they arise. It makes a person a victim of modern advertising and a slave to modern trends. Gluttony's a vice that is rooted in self-indulgence, a practice which leads us to all kinds of ugly vices, including lust and the sexual immorality that grows out of it. It can also be the cause of bad manners and insensitivity to others. The person who is fastidious and critical of all that is dished up at the table is likely to be antisocially critical in other human situations and relationships. The vice of gluttony can seriously impede our capacity for friendship and our ability to live the virtue of charity. So what's the remedy to gluttony, since it includes both eating too much and being too particular? The principle to follow is to think of the pleasure of eating not as an end in life, but as a means to health and happiness. Virtue is always found in the middle way, the moderate way, the rational way, the human way. It involves having our minds and wills fully engaged in our choices and actions.
Truth Bite 30. The Vice of Lust. Lust is a vice so prevalent that many people have come to see it as a kind of virtue. They believe that lust is only a matter of doing what comes naturally, and that natural always equals good. Sure, natural is good. Human nature has been created good by God. The natural world is good. Natural foods and products are generally good. Most of us don't really appreciate artificial things or behaviours. But what if lust is not actually a natural thing? What if human beings were not made to experience unlimited sex, to express themselves sexually whenever, wherever? Human sexuality is actually far more important than this. It's a vital, built-in aspect of our humanity, an aspect of our personhood that is woven through our entire being. It's one of our higher faculties, not one of the lower and more insignificant ones. It's very much geared to our desire to love and be loved by other persons. It's rather pathetic, then, that human beings should throw their sexuality around like bread to the ducks, demeaning others at the same time as demeaning themselves. This is what's happening when lust takes over. Lust, a particularly nasty vice, occurs when a person's self-concept is so low and limited that they value sexual pleasure as a kind of priority in life, treating sexual pleasure in whatever of its million forms as the main focus in life. While sex is one of the greatest powers we have and has great pleasure associated with it, we should know that the pleasure is just an accompaniment, not the thing itself. God has made it a pleasure to make marriage a pleasure and the procreation of children a pleasure, although obviously these things are not undiluted pleasures. The point of God's sixth commandment, that we should not commit adultery, is that we respect the proper context and boundaries of using our sexual powers. And the proper context is not pleasure, not just fun, as many people seem to think. It is full-on, loving commitment to another in marriage. Outside that context, it is just lust, using other people to satisfy natural desires in a way that by God's standards is unnatural, and therefore very much against our own human dignity. It may sound shocking to say this, but this kind of carry-on, indulging our lusts, is more like hate than love, more like destruction than upbuilding. If you just think a little bit about the many spin-offs from the world's obsession with sex as pleasure, you realize that a lot of pain would be averted in society and in people's personal lives if the trend were to change and sex were to be treated for what it really is. Unfortunately, if you cast your eyes over the history of the human race, you see very few signs of this kind of change, even temporarily. However, God's plan for humanity is unchanging. It would be great if we were bright enough to see the whole picture of that divine plan. But the effects of original sin on our minds and wills, even the smartest of us, often blind us to reality. We're trapped in our stupid lusts. There is an answer, the Christian ideal, and there is a remedy, God's grace. But until we actually want answers and remedies, we'll go on our lustful ways, committing ourselves to self-destruction and the destruction of others, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Truth Bite 31. Sloth. None of us thinks that overwork is a good thing. Overwork can damage us in all kinds of ways. If we know any world history, we know it can kill. Some people, even today, when slavery is not so prevalent, die by their own choice of overwork. But leaving aside the workaholics of this world, the general trend today is to work as little as possible for the greatest possible rewards. However driven we are towards success and achievement, we do like to get there with the minimum of effort. Most of us don't have many high goals in life, and so we have to build for ourselves a virtual culture where leisure and entertainment dominate, and we live from one holiday and leisure activity to the next. This adds up to a culture of sloth, that vice which taps into our inclination to do nothing, or to do nothing in particular, but without loss of rewards. Sloth may seem harmless, but sloth breeds a whole lot of other socially and destructive vices. It makes people self-centered, unwilling to stir themselves for others, but expecting the rest of the world to provide their personal needs free of charge. It causes injustice, where people don't pull their weight, or where people shirk their responsibilities, causing more work for others. Sloth breeds professional complainers, cheats, and liars. Does that sound familiar? At the personal level, it undermines our own integrity and shrinks our personalities. How? Because when we are slack and lazy, we are not living a full life, but putting real limits on our talents and energies,
we are learning and experiencing less of life than we should, and making an inferior contribution to the world in general. And it gets more serious. The general irresponsibility that sloth brings can lead on to some very nasty crimes. Think about the evils that can and do come from our refusal to put ourselves out for anyone or anything. When you think about it, you begin to see the connection between taking the easy way out and some really serious crimes like cheating, lying, stealing, drug dealing or drug addiction, or the killing of the innocent through abortion or euthanasia. These are all done by people who don't want to face life's responsibilities and demands, but are happy to make others pay the price of their sloth. This vice has a lot of faces. It finds its way into all aspects of our life. We can be physically slothful, focused on our own physical comfort and pleasure, ducking out of our social responsibilities to help build up the family, the workplace, the school, or society in general. Intellectual sloth comes into play when we avoid the challenges of intelligent reading or studying or discussion, and instead allow the unfiltered media to shape our thinking and sap our individuality. We can be spiritually slothful by avoiding all thoughts of God and our own spiritual life, too lazy to pray or read or do anything spiritually useful. Christ had some tough things to say about how God views the lukewarm, which is another name for spiritually slothful. And of course, morally, we can't hold ourselves upright when we try to kid ourselves that all those other forms of sloth are not all that bad, are often justified in this pressurized age, and may even be good at times. But looked at honestly, sloth is a vice that makes us thoroughly unlovable, self-centered, uncontrolled, small-minded, unloving, and rather useless. At its lowest level, it is a pathetic trait, but at its worst, it can become pathologically and positively dangerous. So sloth is best discovered and worked on early, or other vices will certainly grow out of it, causing untold personal and social damage.